how we came up with these is based on our experience of being sent tracks to mix. And it's like, okay, you hit these boxes, but you kind of missed this requirement to make a good record. This has to happen.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedict Hyde, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm great, man. How are you? Happy Monday?
Yeah, happy Monday. I'm good. Fantastic, actually.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I had a cool story I want to share from the weekend.
Can't wait.
Have you seen the movie Pirate Radio?
No.
Are you familiar with it?
What's it called? Pirate Radio?
Yeah.
I'm looking it up right now.
See if you recognize the cover. It was a pretty big movie.
Really?
And I think you would like it. If you haven't seen it, you should totally check it out.
All right, there's several. Okay, it's a different title here in Germany. It's called Radio Rock Revolution.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's weird. I found the name Pirate Radio, and then this says The Boat That Rocked.
Yeah, that's the original title, it says here.
Oh, weird. Okay. Huh. Interesting. Well, yeah, if you've seen The Boat That Rocked, Pirate Radio, or what was yours called?
Radio Rock Revolution.
Yeah. If you've seen any of those titles, that's relevant. So anyways, there's this DJ, a real life DJ that's portrayed by somebody in this movie called Johnny Walker, like the whiskey. Okay. I think that's a whiskey. But his name's Johnny Walker. He's one of the most famous radio DJs ever because essentially what they did is they started a pirate radio station on this boat when they weren't allowed to and just kept playing rock music out to rebellious teens around the UK. And anyway, so Johnny Walker's like legendary. And he's still got a show on BBC Radio 2. And they played a song I mixed and produced on Saturday, which is great. There's like an audience of like 15 million people apparently.
Oh, wow.
It was Alice Cooper was on the show and stuff. It was pretty sweet.
That's sweet. Which band was it?
A guy named Brett Smith Daniels, and he's a great, amazing guitarist. So it's like a rock song I'm super stoked with. It's like one of the biggest productions I've been a part of where we have like a giant horn section and I mean, it was one guy that played all the horns, but there's a huge horn arrangement and string arrangement on the song. It's very like cinematic. It should be on like a James Bond movie or something, I feel like.
That's pretty awesome. Like I saw that Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack for the movie.
Yeah.
Which is also probably pretty good. Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, that was a cool thing that happened. Thought I'd share that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Congrats, man. That's like you've been doing some cool stuff lately. Like the last time we had the radio airplay for the Wet Future.
Right.
The band that you did, and now this. So yeah, stoked.
Yeah, very stoked. Yeah. And Brett Smith Daniels is actually the artist that was featured on the radio this past weekend. He is self-recording a song currently right now, and I'm hoping I'm going to get the files to mix that this week. But he's going for the DIY thing that we're teaching, and I think it's going to be great. He's been sending me little demos along the way to see how it's coming along, and so maybe we can get that on the radio. I just want to get a fully DIY recording that I get to mix on the radio so bad. That'll just be like the biggest proof of our whole podcast.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, as I said, that happened to me twice last year, which is awesome.
I'm jealous.
Every single time that happens is like, it's the best thing. You said something interesting that I want to have a question on real quick, because you said like he's sending you demos and you're going back and forth, probably giving him feedback, or I don't know how the process, what the process looks like, but do you actually do that a lot with like self-recording bands and people? Do you like that process? Or is it usually that they just recorded the first thing you hear is the final recorded thing?
I like to get stuff sooner than later. So I like the potential of being able to spot a problem in advance can be such a huge advantage. So the sooner the better kind of thing. I think in hindsight, I should have been asking him to send me even stems, maybe, so I could like really look closely. But I really trust his ability. He's a very talented guy, so I'm sure it's going to be great.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, I'm asking because I found that I really actually enjoy that process a lot. It's like I always did it, but especially since I've stopped recording and like since I do only mixing mastering, I spent more time doing the remote production thing where like people send me demos, I give feedback, they refine, they send it again, I'll give feedback again, and we do it like that until we feel the songs are finished. and then they start recording, and maybe I even give feedback on the recording, as you said, like if everything sounds good. And I, at first, when my calendar was full with recordings and mixing and mastering and editing and all those things, I couldn't spend as much time doing that, and it always felt like it was pretty exhausting, and I always felt a little behind on that stuff. And now I can do that much more, and it's became part of my package basically that I offer. And I found that I really enjoy it actually, like just sitting back with headphones, listening, and only listening for the music more than anything, and like writing down my thoughts in real time, sending it back. It's like something I really, really enjoy because I don't have to be in the ideal listening position. I don't have to even be in the studio. I can like take a walk and like just listen to the demos and see how the songs feel. That's a totally different perspective, and it's so helpful both for musicians and for me. So I was just curious about how you feel about that, because I really enjoy that now.
Yeah, I think I've had it both ways, where it's been a really good process, but then I've also had it where they are like sending me tracks expecting me to have like, it's almost they think that I've got the master session going.
Yeah.
For over like, this undetermined amount of time that they're going to be recording. And like that doesn't really work.
No.
Like I can't, if I'm not the producer, I can't be organizing and worrying about editing all these tracks and stuff like that. It's just, it's a different mindset, to be that person, and a different job entirely, as we've discussed. So sometimes there's some boundaries that have to get established. Be like, happy to look at these, but I'm just going to be like listening. I'm not working the tracks yet until we're mixing, and I'll just be offering thoughts, kind of thing. I have a related question for you now.
Okay, yeah.
I got 9 songs, but they got 16 total coming for this band that I plan to be working with, and I listened to them all and made some notes, kind of thing. I like to do that. I listen to all of them in a row. I don't repeat any of them, and it's just like you said, I'm not in the sweet spot, like in work mode. I'm just listening, and I just make my gut reaction notes.
Yep.
I personally like to not listen to the songs again until there's like a new version that shows up. Do you do that as well? My philosophy is that I want to hear it for the first time, and I want to have that ability for as long as possible. So ideally, by the time they send me a new version, I've forgotten about the song entirely.
Exactly.
Where I think some people, when they send me demos, they kind of think that I've been thinking about it 8 hours a day since they emailed it to me.
Yeah.
But it's like you get literally how long your song is how long I'm trying to think about it, and then I'm literally trying to not think about it until I'll send you those notes, and it's off my plate until the next time.
Yes.
Are you similar?
Yes, totally. And I actually, people kind of like that now, and I always explain it like that I do it like this. So my process is pretty similar. I get the demos, I listen, and while I'm listening in real time, I make notes. So sometimes I just write down my thoughts. Sometimes these notes will have things like, okay, like intro is cool, let's see what happens. Oh yeah, verse, like the transition to the verse is a little weird. Oh wow, and the chorus kicks in really well, stuff like that. So I'm listening in real time and writing down whatever I think. And then I'm sending it to the band, and I tell them that I do that in real time once, not listening again, just as you said. And then ideally there's enough time between that first round and the second round, so that, as you said, I forgot about the songs basically. And what I then do is I'll do the exact same thing the second time around, and I do not look at my notes from the first round. So I do the same process. I listen to the songs just as if it was the first time. I write down everything that comes to mind, and then it's interesting to compare the two feedback rounds, the two notes, to see if some of the things are still the same, or if some of the things are not appearing anymore on the new notes. And this is a pretty interesting process sometimes for me. And I do the exact same thing. And I don't want to do it if it's too close. So if they send me demos, I send them the feedback, and then 2 days later I get the new demos. If at all possible, I wait till I listen to them.
Yeah, you need some space. That ability to hear for the first time is so valuable. And then another kind of philosophy is I'm almost intentionally really vague that first listen through. It's I almost listen to them all, even if it's going to be an album. So, for example, with these 9 songs, I listen to them as if I'm choosing a single. If I can only choose one. So if there's a song that's not single material to me, I just write, not a single.
Yeah.
Like cool album track. Like there's no feedback at all because I'm not worried about that
Okay.
song right now, kind of thing. And we'll get to that when we are working on that song, kind of thing. And I'll obviously dive deeper. But for demos, kind of thing, it's like, let's focus on the good shit.
Okay, yeah,
for that first
see
listen
that.
through, kind of thing. And it's just like this has potential, this one doesn't. And then sometimes there's like notes like, hey, this verse is just boring. But sometimes it's also just like kick-ass guitar. This riff's dope or whatever, like it's just feeling. And I think some people get that, but some people I think don't, where they're like, this isn't very detailed, but other people do realize that the reaction to the song rather than whatever your guitar part is much more important. That's like the most valuable feedback that I'm going to be able to give is this is like, I really think this is a good song. Like that's what you need to hear. And we need to determine, are these songs good?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I do similar things. I mean, I do listen to all of the songs, so the single thing's not really something I do. What I do is when I'm hired as like, if I'm not just mixing, but really like remote producing, stuff like that, if there's the budget so that I can spend even more time with the songs, sometimes people want to do like 10 songs, but they've written 15 or they have 15 demos, and then they want my feedback on what I think are the songs that should go on the record. So then I make notes about like, I think this one should not be on that. That's maybe I don't know, for a split or a B-side or whatever, or just throw it away entirely. Yeah, things like that. But usually I give feedback on every song. But yeah, it's like interesting topic. Like not really related to today's episode, but like interesting, and I think for people also interesting to hear how that works.
Yeah. To clarify, I do listen to all the songs. It's just at the beginning, I'm prioritizing what I think they should focus on. And it's like, let's work on these songs for now because they're the priority. Let's do that while you're fresh.
Totally. One more thing before we end the banter here that I wanted to say, because that's what I've focused on this past weekend, is speaking of priorities, I always have like too much on my plate. Like that's totally like a problem that I create for myself because I have a hard time saying no to things and I have to force myself to say no to stuff. But it was sort of a resolution that I don't do as much anymore, and that I am more selective and picky about stuff that I do and the commitments I take on. And this weekend, I finally implemented the Gtd method. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I've read the book. It was fascinating, like mind-blowing to me. And I don't know, it's not for everyone probably, but it like really speaks to me, to my personality type. I'm like an organizer and planner, and I really, really like his way of thinking and organizing things. So I took the time and implemented that system, and I feel so much more organized and better. And I feel like it's pretty dangerous because now I feel like I could take on anything because I'm so well organized. So I don't want to do that, obviously, but I feel like I'm much more in control of all the things that I already have on my plate. So I just want to say, if any of you feel overwhelmed with like music projects, or like you have a business or side business or a day job and a band and whatnot, and you're constantly feeling behind, give that book a shot. It's like a recommendation, really, that like just try, see if it works for you. It's called Getting Things Done by David Allen. It's been really, really cool for me.
Yeah, it's a very well-regarded book, for sure. I almost wonder if it's been updated since I read it, because there was definitely some stuff that wasn't very modernized when I went through it. But there's always, in books like that, they're classics for a reason. There's always like such good concepts to cherry pick from, even if you don't take the whole system, right?
I think it's been modernized. I think the last edition was like a couple of years ago, and like it has all the digital tools and everything in it that we can use today. So
nice.
Nice. It totally worked for me, and it's more of the mindset behind it anyway. So yeah. Just a little.
There's that one, I can't remember the exact time he says, but it's like something like, if it takes less than, say, 60 seconds, just do it right now. Don't write it down on a list.
The 2-minute rule.
2 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to like work with that over this last week. Just like, there's no reason not to just do that one thing as soon as it hits me, where often there is a reason to delay. Like I try not to answer every email just as it comes in, because that's like reactive kind of thing. And I want to batch that stuff. But with, I don't know, like freaking washing the dish that I just used for lunch, like whatever, just getting that stuff. So there's not like these little clutters that are just never going to be our priority because they're not important, but they still have to get done.
Yeah. It's like it's way too complicated to explain on this show. It's just something that was on my mind, and I thought maybe for some of you listeners, if you make a record yourself, it's a lot of organizing and planning to do, a lot of communication. You probably still have a job, or I don't know, whatever you do. If you have a job, a family, a band, and maybe a side business or whatever, this is an interesting concept that you could look into. So,
yeah, definitely. All right,
cool.
Let's get into what we're actually meant to talk about at 18 minutes into the episode. Yeah. That was like a mini episode right there.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are still listening, now we get to the actual stuff. So, we are doing part 2 of last week's episode, and it's about the essentials, basically, like the minimum requirements that you like. It's almost like a checklist of things you need to make sure you get it right, so that it's gonna work out and sound good in the end, and that you could work with mixers and don't have problems along the way and get the result you're going for. So we finished last time with drums, and we continue now with bass, guitars, vocals, and all the rest.
Yeah, drums take up one whole episode, and then the rest gets another.
Exactly. So just to, if you just joined us this episode and didn't listen to last week's episode, what we're going to do is we're talking about minimum requirements technically, but also like when it comes to performance, typical pitfalls, things to avoid. Like just we're sort of defining a standard that you need to hit if you want to get a professional product back from a mix engineer, for example, or even if you're mixing yourself. Like these are like the minimum requirements you need to make sure you get right during the recording and production phase.
That's true. Yeah. It is true that it's even if you plan to mix yourself, that you still have to hit all these. But how we came up with these is based on our experience of being sent tracks to mix. And it's like, okay, you hit all these boxes, but you kind of missed this requirement to make a good record. This has to happen. So I think this is going to be a really useful series for people just to review before they start any recording. It's like, okay, have we thought about this? That has to get done. And then when we send it to Benny or Malcolm, they're going to be happy with us.
Oh, yeah, exactly. All right, let's jump in. Listen to last week's episode if you haven't yet. And then, you can catch up on that. And now let's continue with bass.
Okay, I was wondering if you're going to demand we start with guitar after drums.
Oh, yeah. Oh, damn. Yeah, of course. We just no. I'll go through the list. But yeah, guitars would be next, of course. By the way, Malcolm, I just want to say it again. Malcolm, actually, you
I said something that you interpreted as saying guitars come after
you
drums,
confirmed. I just looked it up. You basically, because I've written it down, you basically confirmed that I was right and that the right order to do things is like drums, then guitar, and then bass. So
I don't know about that.
It's on the episode. You said it. Okay, no. All right. Let's move on with bass.
Yeah, well, now that I have an Evertune, I'm happy to go guitars first. All right, so on to the episode. I'm sorry, people listening. I'm sorry. Yeah. Really, like the most important thing is to get us a clean DI of that bass.
Yes.
That will give us so much power to undo any terrible engineering work done on grabbing a bass amp tone. I see some nightmare tracks come in when people try and mic up like 3 different bass amps in the same room as each other. And that can really be bad sometimes. It can like really be unusable. And I mean, there's always a way, but a DI, we're off to the races. And obviously, I still want people to try and get those amp tones. Like ideally, you're sending us both a DI and an amp, but make sure that DI happens. That's so important.
Yes, agreed. Nothing to add to this. Like with a bass DI, you can do everything basically in mixing. It's like, make sure that sounds great. Everything else is like almost optional, and you can really be creative there. You can do whatever you want with your actual bass tone and just send it as a reference or hoping that it can be used. As long as you have a clean, great sounding DI, you're free to do whatever you want with the bass tone.
Yes. Yeah. Bass is this weird thing where there's not a lot of variables in that. It's not like a drum kit where we have all these different mics and phase and stuff like that we're always having to worry about. So it's much less complex. You don't need a huge amount of a gear investment to get a good bass recording done. But knowing what to listen for as you produce a bass track is something that takes years of experience to really understand and hear the way that pros do. And I don't even know why that is, but it just is. And so bass DIY recording is kind of routinely not awesome, which obviously we're trying to fix.
Yes. Yeah. We have a whole episode on, or maybe multiple episodes at this point on bass that you should definitely check out. If you go to the show notes, by the way, which is the selfrecordingband.com/58, the show notes for this episode, there are always related episodes, links to related episodes in the show notes. So you'll find the bass episodes that I just mentioned there, and you can have a listen because bass is really, really, really important, and people often get so much wrong about it. Yeah,
definitely.
All right, our favorite thing to say. You need new strings if you record bass, definitely. And probably a new pack of strings for every new song, at least, or most of the time.
Yep, at least replace that lowest one if you're hitting that all the time. That would be very wise. So we've said that 100 times. I'm not even going to beat it down.
Yeah.
New strings. And then in tune, when we say in tune, we really mean it with bass. And this is, in fact, why Benny likes to do bass after guitars, but it's also for the same reason why I like to do it first.
That's the best thing about this. We're doing totally opposite things for the same reason. But yeah.
One of us in Germany is wrong. But yeah, just like literally you got to be watching the tuner for every note you hit kind of thing. And tuning for each note if it takes it. Your instrument needs to be set up very, very well. Just that intonation is so important for a great sounding record. So don't underplay that. If you haven't checked the intonation on your instrument before you record, you screwed up. Do it again.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes people think the guitars are out of tune, or sometimes they even think the vocalist is out of tune, when it in fact is the bass. So I would almost say like in 90% of all records that I got to mix, there was some tuning issues with the bass, like almost in every record. And it takes some experience to realize it's the bass, because sometimes you really think it's the lead guitar or whatever. You think the solo is sort of weird, and then sometimes I pull up a Melodyne or whatever and analyze the solo, and I see that it's perfect, basically, but it still sounds wrong. And then when I get to the core of the issue, it's often, or most of the time, it's the bass. Same thing can happen with vocals. And it's just hard to hear when a very low note is out of tune, but in context, something just sounds off. So really pay attention to that.
Really pay attention and make sure it's great. Jacob Hansen wrote a post into a forum we're both in, and he said bass is the foundation. So if you don't get that right, it's something along those lines, but bass is the foundation was one of them. So somebody asked what they're tuning most often, and he said bass. He said bass over vocals are getting tuned digitally more often, which I bet most people listening to this podcast would have never have said that. They would have always assumed vocals are being tuned more than bass.
So you mean tuned in post-pro, after the fact? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Which is it's something I never thought about before, but totally true.
And another reason why you need a great DI track, because if you have a distorted bass, for example, it's much, much harder to tune that compared to a clean DI with less harmonic content. Yeah,
definitely. So if you're intending to use that weird octave multi-amp rig that you've got going on for the bass, it has to be perfectly in tune. Otherwise, we're going to have to use the DI and reamp something out of that DI to get a similar tone, which is no problem, but just it's something to be aware of.
Yes.
If you're really, really wanting to get that tone, the tuning's on you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get to technical and performance pitfalls. And I think performance is the biggest thing after tuning with bass, because it's all in the right hand. That's what I always say, because bass tone really is in the right hand. The way you hit, like how hard you hit, how consistent you hit is gonna determine what the bass sounds like, especially in the rock or heavier genres. It's so important to be consistent and to hit pretty hard, or right for the thing you're recording. And that's something that there's not much you can do about. Sometimes I hear that they've used new strings and it's in tune, but it just, I don't know, it's just doesn't sit right, doesn't feel right. It's not the foundation that I'm looking for, and it's because the playing sucks. So the timing, of course, also, but more than anything, I think it's the consistency and the attack that you hear in great bass players.
Yeah, there's so many variables to consider as a musician. So, when you're going to the studio for the first time, you get really obsessed with playing in time. And maybe you start nailing that, you get really good with a metronome, and you think you're set. But you then have to also account for how you're hitting each note and like how it actually sounds and stuff like that. It's a big holistic thing that has to happen. So yeah, it's all in the right hand. Shout out to our listener, Richie Jackson, who I know is recording, I think today, maybe that was on the weekend. But he messaged me saying that he's been practicing his down picking like crazy, and getting his right hand in shape for it. And I was like, yes, good job, man.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Like down picking with guitars, and we get to that maybe even more so in palm mute parts and stuff like that, but also with bass, if it's not really super fast, so if you can't pull it off, at least try like doing downstrokes for some parts instead of like the alternate picking stuff. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes the up and down sounds better, but at least try what sounds better, and don't automatically do the whatever feels easier, or like don't go the easy route. See if downstrokes maybe sound more consistent and powerful.
The reason downpicking seems to be popular is that it is, in general, more consistent sounding than alternate picking. It just kind of does that for you. So it's a kind of almost a trick to get a more consistent sound, is just forcing yourself to downpick as much as possible.
Yeah. When I get tracks from really great bass players, especially also in the rock or heavier genres, but like in general, sometimes they play so consistently that it almost sounds like a MIDI bass or like a program bass. Like I had that sometimes where I was like, wow, this is almost like, I don't know, this is super human sounding in a way. It's like some people can pull that off where every note is exactly the same almost. And it might sound weird or like sterile or robotic on its own, but in the context of a song, most of the time, it's just the foundation you need. So
yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. Like MIDI bass, I actually quite love. I've gotten to use it a few times this year already, and it like has really done the job well. But I wish I could humanize it a little bit. But honestly, I'd probably only, like if there was a humanized knob, I'd probably dial it back 5% from perfect. That's all I'd want, like just that slightest bit, and then vice versa. When people send me tracks and they can get it to like damn near perfect sounding, like Inhuman, like you said, it once it's in the mix, it's like, oh my God, this is great.
Oh yeah. Totally agreed. All right, what's next here?
Well, we kind of talked about intonation already, so that's off the list, I think. I've written down, I think I wrote this down, a reminder that MIDI bass solves all of this. That's kind of a joke. I mean, like I said, I do love MIDI bass, and I think that a lot of rock and heavier productions can use it no problem. I actually just used it on a like kind of soft rock tune, and it did great, but that song didn't demand like focus on the bass part. It's holding down the roots, syncing with the kick, MIDI bass like that. It was done in like 30 minutes programming, and mix ready. So don't be afraid of that. You also, again, another situation that gives the mixer a lot of power, because we can swap out the bass itself for a different virtual instrument. But we won't dwell on that. I like this one that you wrote down, Benny, DI clipping.
Did I write that down? Yeah. All right. I did. Yes. Yeah. Go on. What did you like about it?
Well, I think it's just worth mentioning, and that's worth mentioning for all parts of this. Actually, clipping seems to happen more often than it should for some reason. But so clipping can sound good. We have to kind of establish that. I think, especially clipping the DI can be cool. But it's probably something that you're better off just leaving alone and not doing, and letting your mixer decide to do that if they want to. I can clip the DI signal if I get sent one that isn't clipped, right?
Yes.
That's in my power. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and also I think that it's a different sort of clipping. Like the clipping that happens when people plug their active bass into an interface DI that doesn't have enough headroom. For example, like a high C input on an interface. So for example, my interface here, my small bus powered interface that I have, if I plug even my passive P bass in there and I hit the lowest string really hard, it clips with the gain all the way to the left. Like there's just not enough headroom. And that sort of clipping that happens often, it just doesn't sound pleasing. And it's also inconsistent because you will clip the loudest notes and everything else will be clean. If we clip a DI on purpose, we'll probably do it in a different way. We'd probably try to make it consistent and use it to shape the overall sound of a bass or to tame some of the transients, but then it's probably not like the ugly sort of digital hard clipping from a cheap preamp. So, or a cheap converter. So, as I think, as with everything, it's all about being intentional. So, what I'm talking about here when I say DI clipping and you should avoid it is you should avoid the unintentional clipping of your input for like if you have not enough headroom. And in this case, if that happens to you, use a DI box. If you have an active instrument with a lot of output or even a passive bass and your interface just can't handle it, use a DI box. Use a passive DI box with tons of headroom and you don't have a problem. And just make sure it doesn't happen if you don't want it to. And even if you do want it to happen, maybe do it on a separate track. Maybe split it just to be safe.
Yeah, I would agree. In general, consumer or even prosumer interfaces and preamps don't clip well. So I've got like a Neve style preamp here that I occasionally use for that if I'm looking for that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's not happening. Like I would never use my Apollo preamps to do that.
No.
Fun fact, if you have an Apollo preamp, turn up the gain all the way with a guitar plugged in, and it's like the grossest fuzz tone you've ever heard.
Yes, you can always abuse your equipment like that on purpose, of course. That's why I say it's all about intention. If that's the sound you want, by all means do it. But maybe use a splitter or so in front of it and just record another version of it without the clipping, just to be safe.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Yeah, great thing.
Up next, wrong bass for the job. That's a common one. There's not often. There's always like 6 guitars in the room and then 1 bass.
True.
And if it's like you're at a studio where the producer, who's probably a guitarist, bought the bass, it's probably not even that great of a bass. Like it's like they're willing to spend thousands on a guitar, but bass,
Yeah.
So if you can track down some options for bass guitars before you go into a session, that's a great use of time.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say I'd start, by the way, you don't have to explore all the options because I would start with like the basic tried and true things that always worked all across every genre, basically. So there are, of course, unless you are in a very niche thing where a certain style of instrument is required, if you start with either a P bass or a J bass, like a jazz bass or a precision bass, you're gonna cover most of it already.
Yep.
Maybe you want to try like something like a Music Man, like the Sterling bass or something like that, or maybe you want to go, if you're doing modern metal sort of thing, you want to have a 5-string or like the Dingwall, something like that. Exactly. But usually, I wouldn't go and try all the weird basses and sorts of types of basses that exist. I would start with one of these, and you probably find something that works. I could use a precision bass or a jazz bass on almost everything. So
just make sure it intonates and sounds great. I've got a P bass on my wall, and it works almost every time. It's great.
Yeah.
I think when you're choosing basses, you also need to consider scale length and tuning, and make sure that you can actually play in tune at the tuning that you want to do. That's been actually going back to MIDI bass real quick. That's one reason I end up using MIDI bass sometimes, is that we're in a low tuning that the instruments that are available to us aren't great at going to. So MIDI bass lets us get there and still have that tuning stability.
Yes, yeah, exactly. For super low tunings, consider a 5-string or like all sorts of things. That's a little outside of the usual stuff. So, but yeah, totally agreed.
Yeah.
Cool. Wrong bass for the job. I mean, it's obvious. Then wrong person for the job. That's an interesting one too, and that can happen. Happens pretty often, actually. Sometimes your rhythm guitar player is the better bassist, for example.
Again, this goes back to it's all in the right hand, and pretty much somebody in your band is going to hopefully have a monster right hand, and you should take advantage of that because it will transform how your records sound.
Yep, absolutely. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the bassist is really, really good, and like the rhythm guitarist has some timing issues or not, it's just inconsistent or is not hitting hard enough. Sometimes if the bass player can play guitar, sometimes it's worth trying the other way around. But anyway, just figure out who is probably the best person to do it. And if you can, like, just leave your ego outside the studio or the jam space, because it's like it doesn't help the record, and no one cares in the end who has played that bass. No one cares if it's MIDI, if it's the bass player, if it's the guitarist or the vocalist. Like all that matters is what comes out of the speakers, as always. So yeah, I know it's not hard. It's not easy for a lot of people to do, and everyone's passionate about the record and the band, and I totally get that. But have a conversation about it, and if you really feel like the bass player is not the best person to play bass in the studio, maybe try and have another person do it.
Definitely, better's better.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So we skipped one thing here that I want to go to real quick, and this is not enough top end and mid range in a bass tone. We have an entire episode on that, so we don't have to say much about it. It's episode 12. So if you go to theselfrecordingband.com/12, you'll find that episode, or on your podcast app, just go to episode 12.
Right.
It's called Bass Tone is More Than Just Low End. And it's about this. So sometimes people think if they have a thick, big low end, that's all they need, but they're lacking top end and mid range. Oftentimes that comes from using old strings. Sometimes it comes from sometimes they dial back the top end on the bass itself because they think it's like noisy, or sometimes people don't realize that this stuff can actually be useful. But when in doubt, leave that stuff in. We can always make it duller and filter it out. But if it's not there, if it lacks the harmonic content, if it lacks the top end, the clarity, there's only so much you can do as a mixer. You can't bring back what's never been there. Yeah. So when in doubt, I'd always track a brighter bass.
Definitely.
And send that to the mixer.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
I agree with that so much. It's so much of that energy and punch is that top end and higher mid-range stuff. And that's a reason why picks get used so often in the studio, actually, is because it just adds that attack, which is so useful for us mixing. It really lets us lock it in with a kick drum or a snare drum, actually. We can really blend those two off of that transient stuff. And picks also help things be more consistent in general too. Yeah. In general.
That being said, if you already know you don't want to have a bright or clear bass tone, if you're doing some indie stuff where you want a really mellow, really dull sounding bass or whatever, just record a clean DI with all the mid-range and top end and do it on a separate track with whatever amp settings you want, or filter it or do whatever. Just to be safe, include the clean, clear DI. And I always think about it in the way that if you think about what a low piano note sounds like, the clarity you get on a piano, that's what your bass should sound like most of the time. So I don't know, that's the closest thing I can compare it to, like a deep.
I totally agree.
A deep note on a piano. That's basically the bass sound I want, the clarity I want.
Yeah, and consistency like that as well, where it sounds like that big full thing each time you hit that key on a piano.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, cool. That's it for bass, basically.
Yep. Now we'll be doing guitars, which is going to have a lot of overlap with bass.
Yeah, that's going to be a short one. Yeah. So clean DI, same thing. Reference tone track plus DI. Great amp capture is always good, of course, but just include the DI to be safe. The amp capture could be used, could also just serve as a reference.
Yep.
So both should be possible for most people. Don't only send the DI, because then you have to guess whatever guitar tone you want it. So that's not good.
Yeah, unless it is because sometimes DI is a tone that people go after.
Oh, yeah.
So if that's what you like, a J bass into a DI really has a sound, I find, kind of thing.
Yeah. But with really guitar, it's rarely the case, I think, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Actually, when I worked with Spirit Box, who I think we've talked about on this before, they had backing tracks. We were doing a live recording session, and they had backing tracks going and stuff, and there was some clean parts. So he was playing this crazy distorted stuff, and there's a clean ambient thing going over top of it. And we did a pass through, and that track played, and I was like, hey Mike, I think there's meant to be some amp model on this DI track, because it the clean track just sounds like a DI. And he's like, no, that's kind of what we do in this genre. We just throw reverb on a DI for the cleans. I was like, all right, there's something new every day.
Yeah. I mean, I could totally see that. And sometimes I could also imagine for, I don't know, funk or anything where you needed a clear attack and basically just a clean percussive sort of guitar sound. DI is a great thing because you have all the transients, all the punch, all the percussiveness. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
That's a funny story. I didn't expect it but with Spirit Box though, but yeah.
Yeah. So important one you've got down here is wrong pick choice. really easy to overlook that. A guitar pick transforms the attack of a guitar, and again, that's something that's really, really great for a mixer to be able to use, and it's something we can't really change necessarily. We can't really change like how the harmonic transient of a guitar sounds once you've recorded it that much. So choosing the right pick makes a big difference.
Yeah, choosing the right pick and holding it at the right angle as well, like hitting the string at the right angle. The combination of those two makes such a difference. And there's basically two angles that or two perspectives that I look at it. And it's the first one is how precise the attack is, or how scratchy it sounds, for lack of a better term. Like you could choose a pick and hold it in a way so that you have a really clear, sharp, short transient, especially with palm mutes or like leads or anything with a clear attack. Not so much like with open chords, but like with palm mutes or single notes, stuff like that. Or you could have a longer sort of attack, or more scratchy attack that just, I don't know how to describe it, but the sound of like scratching along the string. When palm mutes do the thing, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So that can be desired or not, and it's the result of pick choice and the angle you hold it, basically, and how hard you hit also. But like this can really be manipulated by choosing the right pick or changed. And the second perspective is sometimes you have, especially with leads, you get weird squeaky noises that are pretty annoying, that sometimes you don't hear them right away, but once you notice it, you can't unhear it, and it's like really bothering you, and you can't get rid of those squeaks and squeals and stuff that shouldn't be in there. And that is oftentimes also the result of picking the wrong pick. Like one pick could do that, and another pick could totally get rid of all this, or help you get rid of all this.
Yep. Yeah, it's really important. The thickness of the pick will also affect how consistent you play, so keep that in mind.
Oh yeah.
It's a reason that I gravitate to thicker picks. I find that they are generally more dynamically consistent. But that said, there's always a time and a place for a soft pick.
Yeah. That's a good thing you bring that up, because most people, when we talk about pick choice, they think of different thicknesses probably, and they have their model of pick that they just like. But we're talking
material.
We're talking thickness, but we also talk material and shape of the pick. So you could have like a jazz pick, you could have the standard Tortex, there are different shapes, and it all matters. So it's the shape, it's the material, and it's the thickness. So don't just use whatever you like and then use varying thicknesses. Just try different picks, completely different picks, shapes, and materials as well.
Yeah. It's good to have a little container of options sitting nearby, and always have a green Tortex handy.
Yeah.
That's like tried and true, the most commonly successful one. Not always, but it definitely seems to win the most. And I think like most engineers would agree.
Yeah. So to me, the three most used are the green Tortex, the black jazz pick, like not the red one, but the black one. The
black one, yeah.
I don't know what it's called, Jazz 3 or something black.
I think so.
That and
the big one or the small one?
It's a yellow or like bright yellowish.
It's kind of like translucent a little bit.
Yes.
That's funny. I would have
like
said the exact same three, and in the same order. Now that jazz pick, the oversized one, so the one that's like the size of a normal pick, or the tiny one?
No, I think it's a little smaller than a normal pick, but it's, I think, bigger than the red one, than the tiny one.
Yeah.
Not the tiny one. The black one is a little bigger. Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
There you go.
Try it out.
Those are the three ones you need.
Exactly.
I'm going to leave this next note to you to lead in, because I'm curious. I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Okay. So the alternate picking or downstrokes, so up and down or just downstrokes, especially for palm mutes and heavy chugs. So what I mean by that is, often when I get stuff from people, sometimes they played a palm mute part that's actually not too fast to pull it off with downstrokes only. But for some reason, they just did what was easier probably, or felt more natural, and they went for the up and down strokes.
Right.
And that sometimes, or oftentimes, sounds weaker, more inconsistent, and also causes timing issues. So if you're playing like eighth notes, for example, and you only play downstrokes, chances are each of the strokes will be pretty much the same intensity, the same volume, and like have the same attack. you will pretty much be able to nail the timing. And if you go up and down, it might feel easier, but it's often has this weird shuffle to it when it's not supposed to. And it has weird, inconsistent attack. And I don't know. It's just something people don't think about, I think. They think it sounds the same, but it totally doesn't. So whenever you can, I would do downstrokes, unless it's really too fast.
Dynamics change, attack changes, timing changes. So it's definitely I don't want to say that you should never alternate pick, because obviously there's tons of, like, every song's going to have a spot probably. But I think what we're saying is to default to trying to down pick. And that's going to give you, more often than not, that's going to be a better choice. So we're kind of giving you like in general, aim for this.
Yeah, totally. So the next one I'm going to give to you, but basically because we had a conversation about this, the ringing strings and what to do about it. Because I have to be honest, it doesn't bother me as often as it seems to bother other people. So I don't use a fret rep every single time, and I don't do a lot. Like, I will mute strings whenever something bothers me. So we're talking about ringing strings that are not supposed to be there. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I don't do much in that regard unless it's really bothering me, or like a person constantly hits a string that's just not supposed to be in the chord. I'll tape it away or whatever. But there are people who always use fret reps and try to make sure nothing is ringing. And what's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't default to it. I kind of, again, if I hear it, I've got the little piece of paper towel handy to like slide under the strings and mute them out or whatever. And then, I'm always beside the guitarist, so I'm reaching over and muting a string if I need to. So it's not like an always thing. I don't have something around the nut like some people do and stuff. But that said, I never regret it. When I'm mixing and I'm like doing a part that I know that we did that to, I'm like, dang, this sounds really good and clean. I'm stoked we did that. So it's something that I'm like, maybe I should do more of this, because it's really awesome being able to really like limit or even distort more like a guitar part without bringing out anything negative. It's just like embracing, like all we have is good. I like that. It's kind of like being able to have a drum shell without cymbal bleed. You can really mangle it into something unique and cool in that situation because it's alone. That's why drum samples can be so powerful, for example. So it's kind of similar. If we eliminate these extra noises, it kind of gives me more power to fuck shit up.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. Maybe I should do it more as well. That's why I was asking. It doesn't bother me as much, I guess. I really don't like it, of course. If there's a string that just doesn't belong to the chord we're playing, we need to do something about that. But the noises that a guitar makes if you don't mute the strings, like on the head of the guitar, for example, like I don't mute that always, but maybe I should do more often just to get a cleaner sound. It's kind of a must, or like a recommendation for the really heavy stuff if you want to get it really clean sounding. Not clean, like if you want to record heavy distorted guitars, obviously, but so not clean guitars. But if you want that very, very defined, sort of heavy sound. So that's clean in the sense that, as you said, there's only stuff in it that belongs there. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, that's actually a good point to bring up, is that the heavier you're going, the more clean you need your recording to be.
Yeah.
Because there's no signal to noise ratio, really. It's all just noise. It's all loud. So that the little tiny scuffs of an unintentional string get brought up in volume so much by like distorting an amp heavily. So that's why. Again, it really always depends. So trust your ears on that. And more so what I'm talking about when I'm talking about string muting is muting like if they're playing a power chord on the top 3 strings, muting the ones under it so their hand doesn't accidentally pluck those every once in a while. And it's almost just, it speeds up tracking. We don't have to even worry about if they strum too far. It's not going to ruin the take anymore. So that's nice.
Yeah, totally. Then pick attack cutoff. What I meant by that is, I think I put that in there, but like if I did, what I meant by that is, and that's something I encounter pretty often, is that when people edit their stuff themselves, or even if they just cut away the silence before the song or something, sometimes they cut into the first attack, like the first note. And if they edit guitars, they do it throughout the song multiple times, which is really bad. And that is because if you look at a DI, the first thing you see, or the biggest thing you see, and you think that's the transient, is not actually the transient. It's already the note that you see that has the most energy. And right before that, like a couple of milliseconds before that, is the actual pick attack. And you don't really see that on a DI. You see the transients or the chords or the individual hits. You see them pretty well on a DI, but you don't actually see the pick attack. And you need to either leave enough space before those cuts, those notes, or you use some sort of trick to make the pick attack visible. And you can do that by distorting the track, like putting an amp sim on and then filtering out the low end below 1 kilohertz or so, then printing that so you see the waveform and use that as a guide to edit your DIs. And that what you will see is that on that track with the distortion and with the low cut on, that the actual pick attack, the scratchy pick attack thing, will be a bit before the thing you see on the DI track. And that's where you want to cut and edit. And you don't want to cut into the guitar. So that's just a little help here. Like you can do it without that trick if you just get some experience. But just know that you absolutely don't want to accidentally cut into the pick attack.
Agreed. Yeah, it's that's again just another experience thing, and you learn to kind of be able to just see what you're actually meant to be looking at. But it is deceiving until you figure that out.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're not editing yourself at all and just sending the whole raw thing, don't leave a couple of bars of space before the first note. Like there's no reason to cut to export from bar one, beat one, bar one of the song. Like you can have as many bars as you want before the song, basically. Just so some people do that for whatever reason, but there's no need to do that. Just include 2 bars of silence to be safe, and we're good.
And a longer fade out as well than you think.
Yes.
Same. Yeah. I don't think we need to spend time on this next thing because we already said it, but let's just say it. The wrong guitar for the job. This is also just as common, or maybe more common than even having the wrong bass for the job. Guitarists are so preferential to their live guitar, but the live guitar is probably got destroyed frets and is terrible in the studio.
Yeah.
So you have some guitar options and different pickup options. Sometimes single coils are exactly what you need. Sometimes humbuckers are. Sometimes active pickups could be the sound you need. And then wrong person for the job, of course, is still relevant. Yeah. Wrong amp for the job is a real thing too. But if you're giving us a DI, that's why, again, the DI is so important, because we don't expect you to have a wall of different vintage Marshalls and stuff to shoot out and figure out while you're in the studio. So if you give us a DI, a mixer can do that for you.
Oh yeah, agreed. You know what? I think, despite what we said in the beginning, we should maybe do a third part of the series, because we are close to an hour with this episode, and I don't feel we should
rush it.
You shouldn't treat vocals as an afterthought that we just burn through real quick, because it's just so important and so much that can go wrong. Yep. Let's do a dedicated episode on vocals.
I'm down, and we do have keys to cover, although that will be very quick.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we'll wrap those up into part 3.
Yes, it's better for you as a listener if we do that. So sorry, we said we're gonna do, but it's gonna be 3. And I think this is probably, to be honest, one of the most helpful series of episodes that we've did so far. Like we covered so much in these 3 episodes. It's pretty cool. So stoked.
Yep. I'm so excited to have all 3 of these out, because whenever somebody starts a project, it'll be like, listen to these 3 in order and make notes.
Yes.
It's like the most important thing you could do before you go into the studio.
Yes, totally. So one more thing before we wrap it up here is, or actually 2 more things. As always, I'd love to see you in our Facebook community, or we'd love to see you in our Facebook community. So if you go to theselfrecordingband.com/community, you will be forwarded, redirected to the Facebook community, and you can join that. It's free. It's a great place to hang, to ask questions, to get feedback on stuff you're working on. Join us there. That's the one thing that I wanted to say. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, as last episode, I already mentioned it, we have a gear guide. It's like it's called the Essential DIY Recording Gear Guide. And you get it if you go to theselfrecordingband.com/gear guide. And it's a great addition, that's what I wanted to say, to this episode, because we covered the the bare minimum requirements that you have to do, basically. And this gear guide covers the minimum requirements of stuff you need to get in order to record yourself. So it covers microphones, interfaces, computers, I think, like all sorts of things. It's free. Download it, theselfrecordingband.com/gear guide, and pair this with this 3-part series of episodes, and you're off to a great start, I think.
Definitely. All right. Well, then we'll be back with some more next week.
Exactly. See you. Bye. Thanks for listening.
Bye.